Hello and welcome to the second installment of Critical Mission, where we take you through the important events in the gaming landscape and look at topics relevant to the interactive industry today. My name is Felix Dejean, I'm your host, and with me this week I have Alister MacInnes.
Hey guys, Ali here, how you doing? I hope everything is all good.
And Kevin Zepik.
Hello from everyone's favorite bearded gamer, except for probably the rest of them.
And last but not least, we have another Canadian, Roark Suter.
Hey, what's going on? It's lovely spring here in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
All right, great to have you with us, guys. And with that being said, let's delve into the headlines of the week. And starting, we had EA's CEO John Riccitiello resigning from his post as CEO of EA this week. On top of a very burdened launch of SimCity. Now, this was kind of interesting because anyone who's been following EA for quite a while now knows that Riccitiello has not been having the easiest time guiding the company through this kind of burdened financial times. And not everyone would agree with his approach to leading the company. So it comes it comes as a very odd kind of moment of transition for EA as far as leadership goes, especially considering the fact that they've only had Riccitiello on for this generation of games, and we're kind of almost at the point where we're segueing into the next generation of games, and this is where they kind of say leadership is not working, or at least not as well as not as well as expected, as the article goes on to state that that the sales numbers and how they were projecting their revenue and income were set below expectations, which was also a part of him resigning. Now, I want to throw it out to you guys to kind of hear what your guys' take on this is, especially knowing that Riccitiello has kind of been a bit of not necessarily a controversial figure for EA, but definitely under his reign, under his tutelage, EA has kind of been taking some interesting turns, and some would not say for the best. So I think let's start with you, Ali. What's your take on this?
Well, my take on this is I can't help but feel he's feeling a little bit sorry for himself, a little bit sort of very pressured to obviously resign as a CEO. I mean, throughout I think it's 6 years he's been the CEO of EA, a number of things have developed in EA, what with the release of things like Origin, which of course had its teething problems, to say the least, and its fair share of problems in the press as well, what with the EU-LA misunderstandings and reprints and all that kind of stuff. And then you have like projects like Star Wars: The Old Republic, you know, a very, very big, could have been potentially a very big milestone for EA to get into the MMO space properly, and it didn't do so well to the point where they had to make it a free-to-play model to actually make it successful in any way, shape or form. I think it's a wise decision for him to stand down, assuming that he has just stood down and he's not been pressured down. But I think it's a wise choice for him to stand down and let somebody else take the helm going into the next financial year. What with the next generation consoles being on the horizon, it'd be nice to get a kind of a fresh breath of wind behind the sails as far as EA's direction goes.
Well, I liken this to a pattern we see a lot in the sporting world. I mean, if a team struggles throughout their season, the coach is usually the first one to go. He's fired and used as a scapegoat to explain why the team's to explain away the team's lackluster performance. And I feel he's stepping down, but I wonder if this is more of a forced step down from EA. You know, things like that we'll never really know the truth on anyways. And I wonder if EA saw an opportunity with his contract term expiring to pin a lot of the recent problems on him and to take a little bit of the blame away from some of their bigger blunders.
Yes, it'll just be sort of an opportunity to change, but probably not. Is how I look at this. It's like I don't know. It's probably better that they changed leadership before we actually started rolling out the PS4s and new Xboxes. because I feel like it would have made a bit more hairy transition if we'd started the next generation of consoles. But I don't know, I just sort of see the SimCity debacle as sort of like his final nail in the coffin for his CEO position, and the internet seemed to have quite a weird reaction to this, as if it's celebrating the death of a tyrant or something ridiculous. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You mentioned the reaction of the internet, which is to say, a lot of gaming outlets have actually gone on. I wouldn't say the defensive, but they've gone on a bit more of a bit more of on the contemplative side, I guess. Stating that if you actually look over the years and the strategy that John Riccitiello was putting the company on, it would actually it's right around now that we're gonna start seeing the fruits of his labor. And even Michael Pachter has gone on to say that he actually thinks that this I'm not sure if he said this was going to be one of the best years for EA as of yet, but he definitely indicated that this is going to be a period of time for or a period of time for EA where they're going to be better suited than perhaps they were in the last in the beginning of the last console cycle, where they were out with a lot of new IPs, which didn't necessarily pan out. But moving on, we have another great story this week, which has kind of been all over the internet. I was wondering if you could take us through that, Kevin.
Sure. IGN has been given the exclusive rights to publish in advance their review of the highly anticipated BioShock Infinite, while all other gaming outlets remain under an embargo until release. So Kotaku decided to poke some fun at the idea of review exclusivity and write a review of IGN's review. So for instance, one part of the mock review talks about the length, comparing it to the length of the reviews for BioShock 1 and 2. Now, I enjoyed it. I thought it was quite cleverly written and brings to light a very serious issue in gaming journalism right now, timed review exclusives. Especially to sites like IGN, which already reek of bias, and they're usually only seen when a developer or publisher has something to hide or is doubtful of their work. I mean, a good recent example of that would be Aliens Colonial Marines, where the reviews were held under embargo until the game hit store shelves, so as not to dissuade customers with bad review scores. So, with BioShock Infinite being a game that myself and, a lot of other gamers, even a few of us the work on the podcast here, we've been waiting for, and highly anticipating. So now that it's almost here, this last decision by Irrational and 2K is starting to worry me a little bit. So what do you guys think?
You see, this exclusive review thing really put a bad taste in my mouth as well. For the same reasons as yourself. I mean, review exclusivity, why is it required? I mean, there are plenty of gamers who do go online and base the majority of their purchasing decisions on game reviews. So the reviews are going to get read anyway. I've never really seen, especially IGN, in a position where people are not, on their website getting some kind of opinion on whatever game's just been released that week. They have reviews coming out every single week in abundance. It's not as if traffic is a problem for them at all. One of my biggest worries is exactly what did IGN have to do to get that exclusivity? Because usually you have to pay a great deal of money to get that kind of thing to happen. Do you not? Which, if I'm not mistaken, websites like IGN and Kotaku and GameSpot and all those kind of places, they get their money through traffic. Actually, people going on the website anyway. How exactly does that change from the norm? Why was the early release of the review a requirement for IGN? It just doesn't make any sense for me.
Well, the only way I could see how that would work is if IGN promised a lot of coverage for the game in advance. And from what I've seen, I mean, IGN has had a lot of coverage on BioShock Infinite leading up to it, and I'm not even talking about the press tour that Ken Levine and company has been on. which has gone, basically to every media outlet that covers games in order to talk about the game. So it would seem to me that they kind of put forward the notion that they would cover the game in an extraordinary manner in order for them to gain publicity. Of course, this is all speculation. I'm not saying, either or, but that's how it kind of seems to me, at least. And through that, they kind of got that timed exclusivity. To me, IGN reviews often take a very optimistic stance towards a game, and they're often not that critical of games. At least in my purview, and that kind of makes them very apt for an early review.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to talk about, is the written structure of the actual IGN review itself basically sort of screamed, like, back of the box, like a preview that you'd read off the back of the box, basically. It's like, this mysterious protagonist leads you on a wild adventure on this crazy, like, you know what I mean? And that's how the entire review read, for the most part, to me. It seemed to give just some arbitrary criticism thrown in there just to have criticism, but I don't know, like, the whole thing read like it was the back of the box synopsis, and I mean, that's basically how I use any IGN reviews for the most part, is just to maybe capture a very basic, broad image of the game beforehand, and then move on to sites that I trust more.
Actually trust. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that scare me about this is the fact that I just hope it doesn't become a trend with just looking forward, getting exclusive reviews, because then you're seriously limited early on. If you're wanting to make the day one purchase, but you want some information before you go and do that, like you go down to the shop like half an hour before it opens to make sure you get your copy. If you have to rely on somewhere like IGN, which for me as well isn't the most, it doesn't hold the most credence in their word compared to a lot of reviewers out there. If you have to rely on a particular source, and it's not the best source, you could end up making a very uneducated purchase. And I've said it to you guys before, and I'll say it again, I believe in people having the opportunity to make that educated purchase decision. And if you're then limited as to where you can get that, it's just really, really horrible for people to have that limitation, and have some poor information potentially affecting where they actually place their money.
I think that's a very good point you bring up there, an informed purchasing decision, and kind of moving on from that, I was wondering whether or not you could actually take us into the next news story, Alister.
Yeah, sure. Well, some good news from EA. Obviously, there's been some bad what with the CEO standing down, but shedding a little bit of light on the Simcity debacle. It has been announced that in the first 2 weeks that the game was released, it sold over 1 million copies. I think on like the middle of March it said it was 1.1 million copies in its first 2 weeks of sale, which despite the fact that, the fail was an absolute shambles, the service was not up and running to nearly the standard that it needed to be. That's obviously a lot of SimCity fans there, and when you look at the figures as to how many hours have been put into the game, and how many cities have been made, I think like over 5 million cities or something like that have been made in the game. There's obviously a lot of people really, really enjoying the game. I mean, if there's 1.1 million people playing the game, 5 million cities made, everybody's making their own little world. So the game seems to be, hitting expectations for a lot of people. And I haven't, besides obviously the service being broken at the beginning, I've not really read many bad things about the gameplay itself. So it's nice to see that a long-standing franchise, especially from EA, is still holding that bar nice and high, and serving some kind of expectations as far as the gameplay goes. I'm quite happy about that.
Do you actually have the game?
No, I don't. I don't have the game.
I was just curious. I don't know. I was just surprised that you haven't heard a lot of criticism on the gameplay itself. All I hear is direct comparisons to SimCity 2000 all the time. And how it doesn't have underground railroads, and that, I don't know.
Well, SimCity 2000 I quite enjoyed. I played that extensively, because it was basically the only good city simulator out there at the time. I loved that game.
I was saying this newest one has less features than the older one. That's basically the only comparison that I've been seeing constantly on the internet.
But going back to like the 1 million sales thing for a quick moment here, I would say that I am actually surprised, and I was actually talking to Mitch of all people earlier today about this because he stumbled across this headline. Well, actually, I stumbled across it. Anyways, it was very interesting that he brought up the idea that the kind of press release surrounding this 1 million sales milestone does not take into account how much of this was actually pre-orders.
Oh, that's the one thing
And
it doesn't
that
down.
sheds an interesting light on it. Now, of course, speculation is one thing, and it's not really worth indulging in much because it doesn't really provide you any concrete answers. But it definitely makes one wonder, how many of those sales were post-release and how many of those sales were pre-release.
As in after they found that the game wasn't going to work when they were going to buy it.
Exactly.
That's a good question. That is a good question.
Especially because there was that news story where it had leaked, the internal memo had leaked about what was it? The partners with EA, all the websites that were doing not the pre-orders, but doing the discounted sales and whatnot on it.
Yeah.
And linking through them in order to buy the game. They were stopping with that, so I'm wondering, how does all these sales figures kind of work together to form like a full picture of all the sales that have actually, been done since the launch and pre-launch.
Well, I think it'd be quite interesting as well. The thing that I would really like to also know as well is in one of the articles that I read, it said that the more than half of those sales stem from Origin and other digital distribution services. Now, can you guys think of any other digital distribution service other than Origin that you can buy this game?
I know for a fact that they have agreements with certain outlets in order, they have links going on other web pages and that kind of thing.
All right.
But I don't know to what extent what they mean by that. Of course.
Yeah, I wish we had a little bit more information on that one.
Yeah, it does put the whole SimCity launch along with their purported sales in kind of a shady light, especially when we don't know when what was sold, and especially to what effect, as they kind of went on earlier last week to say that there would be no refunds. That's kind of interesting. If you don't allow refunds, then
Well, of course, I mean that is a very valid point, but that would have been Origin saying that, right?
That was Origin saying
that was
yes.
Origin. Now, the interesting thing about the whole SimCity debacle in its first place is the fact that it wasn't really Origin's fault this time. I mean, I'll never say that again in my life, but I have to admit it this time, that this wasn't really Origin's fault. MacInnes kind of took or at least tried to take as much of the attention off of EA as they possibly could to say, look, we screwed up. We obviously didn't test the servers properly, and then when it came to launch, they just buckled under the stress. Our bad. They actually held their hands up, which isn't something you see a lot of the time anymore. Like the developer trying to take the brunt off of the publisher. But MacInnes, I'll give them their due. They took their stand and said, look, we're sorry. We're working on it tirelessly, and we're releasing patches every however many days they were releasing patches, and within a week they had like over 90% of the servers back up and running, which was kind of cool. But they still didn't want to put the service live yet because that wasn't, they couldn't guarantee that it wouldn't buckle again. So at least, although they should have done all this through the beta testing phase, they're really pulling their socks up, and they're doing a really good damage control, I think. And of course, EA, from the EA side of things, knowing fine well that it isn't their fault, they're still giving people a free game from Origin as a sort of we're sorry that you can't play SimCity on day one, here, have a game out of this choice of games. So, I think both parties are kind of going above and beyond the call in this particular scenario, which again isn't something you see one hell of a lot in today's day and age when it comes to game releases that go bad.
That's true, and I think this is a good point to kind of stop and take a little break and we'll be back in a couple of seconds with our main topic of contention. So stay hooked. Welcome back into our main topic, and our main topic this week is digital rights management, which is back and under more scrutiny than ever. With games clearly evolving from a purely retail affair to starting to dominate the digital space, it's evident that games are starting to become more service-oriented. Now, we're not here to discuss that specifically, but rather delve into what exactly DRM means for games, and in light of its continued implementation into predominantly offline titles, look at where it possibly could take us. Now, I know we just hit on it in our news section that Simcity just passed 1 million sales, and I think a couple of us touched on its rather hairy launch window. Now, I want to hear you guys. Simcity, a predominantly offline title, going to an always online kind of plan. Now, I'm wondering. And I know this is going to be a very, very one-sided kind of a question, but does DRM always work as intended? I can already answer that. That is no. But I want to ask you guys, does it bother you that it doesn't work as intended, or does it just bother you that it's there, period?
Well, in order to answer the question, does it work as intended, as fully as possible, I think you need to kind of. I'm trying to. When I thought about this, I kind of thought, okay, why was DRM introduced? Because I remember maybe 15, 20 years ago when PC games, all they had was a serial, and then you'd install the game, you type in your serial, and then that was your game. And that was the authentication that Windows needed for you to be able to install this game. But then DRM came along.
Well, actually, no, because what you point out is actually DRM.
Well, that's true, but it was very easily cracked. Now, DRM in its the way it's employed today is more of obviously an online authentication system that's supposed to prevent pirated versions of the game from being installed. I mean, whenever you install like a Ubisoft game or something like that, there's always like an online authentication thing that happens first. Not to mention the fact that they now use things like Uplay. But DRM in a sense was to crack down on piracy, and I think that is that's its primary function, and it doesn't even do that well. I mean, with the exception of SimCity, which has been hacked, but by like one or two people, I can't remember, but it's not been released as to how it's done. It's incredibly difficult to do so. But when you have the stuff like you can crack Steam games, you can crack should I say Uplay games, and stuff for like the Windows Live network and things like that. It's so very easily done. I don't think DRM in general has ever worked as intended. It's never been an uncrackable solution.
Do you guys agree?
Well, I don't think it's it's not just for piracy, it's also to control where the content is going to be accessed. It's not a gaming example, but a good example is iTunes and all the stuff on there, where Apple's DRM limits all the use of all your iTunes purchases to Apple devices and your iTunes library, and that you cannot take your songs from your iTunes library and put them into a regular MP3 player.
You're actually talking about a closed platform then, in the same way that you're talking about a PlayStation Network or an Xbox Live.
Well, closed platforms, I think, is where DRM has been used successfully, and it's not as big of a problem. But when you try to crack down on the piracy part of it, the tighter and tighter you try to secure something, the more it starts to affect regular paying customers, and I think that is where the biggest problem is.
Yeah.
There's almost no way to stop piracy 100% altogether, but the further you try to tighten things up, the more you're going to screw over your regular customers.
Exactly, and the more loops you create your customers have to jump through, I mean, that actually encourages piracy in and of itself. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your point there.
No, that's okay. I also wanted to bring up, like, we've also had DRM in older games. Like I remember stories of old DS games where they were trying to crack down on the pirating that way, so they would they installed a service where if it detected, if it thought that your game was modded, or if you're using some kind of hack device to copy the game, that the game wouldn't work. And a lot of people having problems with their legitimate copies on their legitimate systems because the DRM, the hardwired DRM inside was failing.
All right. I guess that could probably go with the Xbox Live thing as well. I mean, it had like a failsafe in it that when if you went onto Xbox Live with a modded Xbox like 360 console, um, your account would be banned, and you wouldn't be able to play games and stuff on the Xbox Live network at all. I guess that would kind of fall into that vein as well. I don't know if the DS one was that an online authentication thing or was it just an inbuilt firmware thing.
It was built-in firmware into the cartridges themselves.
All right, cool.
Even some Super Nintendo games had that. Earthbound has a particularly brutal DRM like that, where if it's hacked, it increases the difficulty of the entire game, allows you to play all the way through it, and then when you get to the final boss, the game freezes automatically.
That's quite interesting. I didn't know about that. I didn't think I was really old enough to crack SNES games. I just have my console and all my cartridges, and they work wonderfully well without any effort from me whatsoever, other than to flick a switch, hold my controller, and smile. It works really well.
Right, but I think what we've just been talking about kind of underlines the entire point of DRM, right? It's to keep the non-paying customers, quote unquote, out, and to keep the paying customers in. But it doesn't always work like that. And when it doesn't work like that, we get something like the what Roark referred to as the SimCity debacle. Where paying customers are withheld from what has typically been an an offline experience, which anyone would be able to kind of experience, whether online or offline, and that could still be achieved with DRM. Akin to the kind of DRM that Alister was talking about earlier. Now I'm gonna put it to you guys. Of course, we all have consoles, right? We don't
Yeah.
all own the same consoles, but we do have consoles. We all own Steam, or
Yep.
we all have a Steam account. So we can both attest to good and bad examples of DRM. Now, when I think of that personally, I think back to people complaining very avidly about the problems that have been occurring with previous Ubisoft titles and their authentication system. But when I think about good experiences, I think about experiences I've had with Steam, experiences I've had um, with Xbox Live or PlayStation Network, and that's very interesting to me because it kind of informs us about how we think about DRM. Now, we don't really care about DRM when it's on a platform. When we have a platform of games, and that platform, that service is to our advantage. But as soon as we're talking about individual titles where it limits the experience in any way whatsoever, we get very worried. And of course, that kind of all stems into the fact that things are being very digitally controlled now, as Kevin was going into before. Now, what I want to put to you guys is, can you tell me what was a good experience you had with DRM, when, like, because it's always being put as to the advantage of the publisher or the developer that DRM is implemented, that people don't steal their game, and we can all relate to that. We wouldn't want to have our furniture or our computers or laptops or gaming consoles stolen. It's only right that you respect someone else's property. We can all agree to that.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
now definitely. But it's kind of interesting that this is kind of a strange way to go about it in looking at titles like Ubisoft's. I remember when Far Cry 2 came out, and there was a big problem with the way that DRM was implemented initially, and the whole Uplay affair back in the day was very known for dropping connections often. Now, that's kind of what we're seeing here, and I know none of you have actually had any time with SimCity, but what has your kind of take on that been, as in stark contrast to kind of your own experiences with these closed off platforms which do use DRM?
I was going to say, I don't think I've had an enjoyable experience with DRM when it comes to specific individual titles. It just creates an extra loop that I just hate jumping through. When I specifically found Mass Effect 3 to be quite annoying, having to set up a whole EA account and having to sign into a second thing in addition to Xbox Live in order to play largely a game that I played for the single player, obviously, because it's Mass Effect. I mean, what else are you gonna do with that series? But I don't know. I find it quite annoying, just sort of slowing down players getting to the actual product, basically. The most recent example, I'd say, of having DRM affect my gaming experience personally would be the release of StarCraft 2, which has an always online connection to BattleNet. Now, it won't actually stop your game when you lose connection with BattleNet, but you'll stop getting achievements, basically. And that happened to me while I was about halfway through the campaign, and I lost probably 3/4 of achievements that I should have gotten, which just sort of, I don't know, was quite frustrating in a lot of ways. But on closed platforms such as Steam, Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, for the most part, these seem to work fairly solid. Obviously, PlayStation Network had that series of attacks on it about a year or so ago, but I don't know, they just seem like it's more of a service attached to that.
Yeah, I've got to agree there. I mean, you were on about like Blizzard and the DRM that they use for that. My bad experience would probably be Diablo 3. I mean, they tried to employ a form of DRM that made the game like a cracked version of the game unplayable because you required essentially to stream the game content on the fly, like all your enemies and things like that.
Same thing with Hire the Swarm. They still
I mean, why is that a good? There's two or three things wrong with that. One, it's like with SimCity. If you don't have an internet connection, there's essentially no single player experience that you can have. You cannot play the game. So if your network goes down in your area for your broadband or something like that, or anything like that happens, or you lose connection for whatever reason, that game is now unaccessible to you. You could be in the mood to play it finally, because I've been turned off of Diablo 3 for a while, but let's say tomorrow my internet went down, I was like, I could really do playing Diablo 3 right now. I can't. It's not possible. Just like the guys with SimCity, once the service went down, the game was completely unaccessible to them. The second thing that I have a problem with Blizzard's DRM for is the fact that it does not serve anybody well, with the exception of the people who have a fast broadband network infrastructure in their area. I mean, I live out in the back of beyond. My broadband is far from the fastest, and I was getting horrible lag and enemy pop-up issues when I was in the game, and it's really frustrating.
Hey, I live with broadband, and I have the same exact issues.
It's crazy. It's not efficient.
I think you both bring up excellent points, and one especially that I think we should discuss, because it seems at the heart of this matter of DRM. We've already agreed that piracy is bad, and of course it hurts both publishers and developers, and by implementation of DRM, it also hurts paying customers.
Oh yeah.
Now, I think the real problem here, and this is of course a subjective opinion I'm going to pose to you as a question at least. We all agree that DRM is fine as long as it does not adversely affect your play experience, but it does bring into question whether DRM is implemented justly in titles that don't really need to be always online, because at the same time it seems more or less something that would be intended for an MMO experience, where it's demanded that there's some kind of mandatory multiplayer component. But when you have a game such as SimCity or such as Diablo 3, which has predominantly been a single player experience, of course, Diablo 3 was very much built around multiplayer to a certain extent, or cooperative play, in order to facilitate that DRM partially. But it really does bring into question, if you're implementing DRM to keep non-paying customers out, and it inadvertently keeps paying customers out as well, is that DRM well implemented?
No, definitely not. I mean, as I was saying earlier on about Diablo 3, um, if I was logging into somebody else's Battle.net account to just try the game at a friend's house, and I had the experience that I did having bought the game, I would not have bought the game. Full stop. There's just nothing at all because my experience was severely compromised by the DRM that was in place in order for me to play the game at all, let alone efficiently.
And the biggest question that's in the back of my mind when it comes to these different titles that don't necessarily require a DRM online connection attached to it is, when am I not going to be able to play this single player game? Like, when are these servers going to be taken down? Like, when is half of my library just going to sort of evaporate due to just age, I guess, is my main concern when it comes to DRM in single player games.
I would totally agree with that, yeah, because there's going to be a point where a lot of the online services, with the market going free to play the way it is, you're going to see eventually that the free to play market will split into the ones that are successful and doing well and people play, and the ones that are unsuccessful and not doing well and people don't play, and eventually, a lot of even if there are still a few people playing, say something like DC, let's say DC Online, whatever it's called, DC Universe, were to fail in a year's time, but the hardcore comic fans would have still been playing it. There's every chance that Sony will bail on that project, and of course the people who are still playing it will have to lose out on that gaming experience, whether they like it or not. They don't really have any say in the matter. And it's even with like non-MMOs, like I don't know, I play games like I play like 18 Wheels of Steel. Like that's an old, well, it's an older series of like a simulator truck game, and it's a brilliant game. But one of these days, I'm gonna look at my Steam list, and it's just not gonna be there because there's not enough people playing it, and Steam or Valve are going to go, well, there's no point in us having this on our system. It's just taking up server space. Absolutely no point in having it. Let's get rid of it. And then when you look at the history, even somewhat recent history, what with the close down of the original Xbox consoles network and the PlayStation 2 network. I mean, I could have played Star Wars Battlefront 2 until I died, but I do not have that option anymore.
Now, I do agree with you, Alister, to a very large degree. I think, unfortunately, your example of using the free to play games, unfortunately, kind of collapses in on itself unless you're one of those, as they like to refer to as whales, who buy a lot of content, that they don't, that's not really needed. A lot of cosmetic content, but what I would equate it to, and to be fair though, I don't really have a problem with that because how old is Star Wars Battlefront 2 now? How old are all those games who that don't necessarily incorporate a a multiplayer component, but they have that, but they also have a single player element. Now I do think this problem is becoming more prevalent as we're seeing more multiplayer only titles enter the space, and if you have to put down $60 for a multiplayer only game, which I know we were talking about a little prior to our starting to record the show, then it brings into the question, what if you buy into an MMO where you have to buy a game for $60, but all your friends don't, and the rest of the world just isn't there with you, and you're 10,000 players on this game, and the game only lasts a month. That's $60 that's gone for you. Now that's fair. You've bought into that product, and you don't really have to buy anything more than that, but it does put in the way we view games into a certain light, because there's with that $60 purchase, there is also a certain expectation of what to get, and I think we're kind of, as I mentioned, we weren't going into the whole games going from retail to digital, but it does seem like we're experiencing a shift towards games being more service oriented, and what you kind of talk about here clearly underlines that fact.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, with a multiplayer-only game, even if you pay $60 for a game that's completely multiplayer-focused, you kind of have to realize that if there is absolutely nobody there to play with, you're not really going to be able to play it. But if you're buying a single-player only game, or like a single-player focus game like, say, SimCity, or Diablo 3 that has an always-online DRM, where the DRM, like the game does not allow you to play it unless you are connected. What happens 5 or 6 years from now when those services go down? What happens when, like, it may not happen with Diablo, but what happens if EA pulls the plug on their SimCity servers in 4 or 5 years' time? Even if there's only like a couple of thousand people still playing, if there's no server for their DRM to connect to, they're going to be hooped. Even if they want to play by themselves, this game that they've paid for and own, or own in giant air quotes, it's not going to be available to them anymore. I mean, we've kind of hit a paradigm shift where the old days was you buy a game, you go to the store, you pick it up, you take it home, put it in your console. That game is yours to do with whatever you want. You can play it as long as you want. You can put it away. 10 years later, you can take out your old system, take out your old game, plug it in, and it still works just as well as the day you bought it. Whereas now, with games as a service and with digital copies of games, we are now more renting games long term than we are purchasing them and owning them 100%. And we've kind of silently moved into that way of thinking, rather than, the publishers coming out and saying, like, hey, $60 gets you access to this game for a variable amount of time. They don't put it like that. They still put it as like, if you pay $60, you own this game. Whereas today, with a lot of these DRM systems and a lot of these services that games have become, you really don't own it.
That's a good point. And I think, with that being said, I think it's also a good point to kind of switch gears slightly, because we've been talking a lot about digital DRM, digital rights management here, and a lot of good points have been made, as well as kind of noting that paradigm shift. But there's one thing that we've only kind of tangentially kind of touched upon, and that's actually what Alister and Roark were talking a little bit about before, which is the DRM that we have, or at least the DRM that's implemented now, that requires this always-on connection, is not always feasible in terms of the internet people have access to.
No, definitely not.
And that's kind of what Roark was talking about, in terms of losing his recorded progress while being connected to Battle.net, because his connection stalled for a second, and that all of a sudden needs to be restarted, or however that works. But that kind of brings into question, do we actually have that digital infrastructure and the internet bandwidth to sustain an always-on model in the kind of scope that games like SimCity and Diablo 3 are asking for?
We will, but we don't.
Yeah, we don't now. I mean, if you live anywhere outside of like a major town or a city or any kind of area that requires a very efficient and very well maintained communications infrastructure, you kind of don't really have it at your disposal at the moment. I mean, in the United Kingdom right now, we are actually in the process of upgrading ourselves to a fibre optic telephone network. We already have a fibre optic cable network, and it's been installed for, I don't know, 15 years or so, something like that. And there are a lot of places in the country, the majority of the country actually has cable broadband available to them. But there are, of course, people like myself who are not in in any kind of place where civilization actually exists, and so I still have to rely on my telephone line with ADSL broadband. And although it works, and it works well enough, and it's stable to a degree, and it performs the function, but it doesn't really perform the function as well as I need it to for the demands that I have of an internet service in this day and age. But of course, once we upgrade to the fibre optic telephone networks across the entire nation, that will greatly change, and that should be done by, I think it's supposed to be the end of 2014. The whole country will be rolled out with this, and then it shouldn't be a problem.
And that's going to bring up the issue of bandwidth caps. Now, I know not every country has bandwidth caps, but countries such as Australia, we do know have it. And I don't know if any of the countries that you guys reside in have bandwidth caps. I do think like some of the companies over here in the cold north of Northern Europe, they do have it, and it definitely to me it's kind of baffling at the same time because DRM, as kind of Ali have mentioned, has been implemented in various ways, and sometimes it's been very straightforward. Like the game you buy has a code in it, you plop in the code, everything works, that's great. But that's easily cracked, and then you get these always on connection style DRM plans, which kind of seems to have an adverse effect on it, especially as Kevin went into concerning the offline play no longer becomes an opportunity. Now, this calls into question what Kevin was talking about, whether or not we actually own the games we play or the games we buy, for that matter. And for a long time, it's kind of been a question whether or not the industry was going to go from having you buy a product, you own a product, i.e., you buy a product that has both a multiplayer component and a single player component, and you can play that offline, to a kind of business model where we're buying licenses now. And I think that's a real fear that people have as we move increasingly more into the digital space, that gone are the days where you actually own a product, where you're able to play a product offline, where it works when you need it to work. And welcome to the days of you have a license and you could buy a license, and the license is only going to be for online play.
Well, to get back to your point on bandwidth caps, Canada has definitely some more draconian ones as well. We have some very low broadband caps here in the Great White North. But as far as actually owning games, I'd like to, but I haven't owned a game in quite a long time, except for obviously the console games that I've purchased for my Xbox. But I mean, even then, some of those are probably just like, oh, this is a disc license. But no, I mean, we don't own our games anymore. It's just it's a fact, really.
It is a really strange thing. As far as the broadband, right? When you say bandwidth caps, do you mean speed or data data usage?
Data usage.
Data usage.
Data usage, yeah.
Yeah,
we have. We do have a variety of suppliers in the UK. Some of them are quite stringent on data usage. Like there's a supplier, I think it's called PlusNet. That I think the maximum data usage cap you can get is 40 gig a month, which is awful if you've just reformatted your PC and you need to re-download everything from Steam. But other than that, there are a lot of providers out here who have this kind of unlimited usage, subject to a fair usage policy. And if you read the fair usage policy for the majority of the providers, there's once you hit the threshold of, I think it's 100 or 150 gigabytes of data in 1 month, you'll receive a letter or something saying, please curb your usage, because obviously there's network contention and things like that comes into play, and it could potentially be affecting other customers on the same circuit as you are for their broadband. Owning games is a really, really strange thing, because I have an archive sitting right next to me of like PlayStation 2 games and old PC games. Hell, like PlayStation 1, SNES, Mega Drive, loads. And I treasure them because they represent a huge part of my gaming life to this day. Including this day, because I still play like loads of them. Like I've got my SNES set up and everything. And I still enjoy them regularly. I would hate to have to rely on an online service to be able to pick up a little bit of nostalgia on a daily basis. Because, I mean, I dare say, who knows, the Wii U store might come out, or probably has, I'm not really up to date with it, but it might come out with something for, like a SNES library, like a retro section. And I would hate to have to rely on the Wii U service to be online, or to be up and running, or hell, for my internet to even be working.
No, I completely identify with that, Alister. I just have this huge fear of an entire era of gaming just sort of shriveling up and evaporating as the years go on, and just not being able to play. Like, imagine if BioShock had always online DRM, and we wouldn't be able to go back and show off that iconic game to, like,
That would be
whoever
awful.
down the road.
But I think that's also a fair point, though, because if I'm gonna play devil's advocate here in a moment, and I know you guys are not gonna like me for doing this,
Go
But-
for it. Go for it.
but say for example,
ready.
you like I think the problem with SimCity is the fact that it was always online, was very poorly communicated, wasn't made as kind of a staple of that reboot. Of that franchise. Now, with that being said, if you're gonna buy a title and we make it perfectly clear to you that this title is gonna, if you're gonna play this title, you're gonna play it online. There's gonna be no offline options, but we're gonna promise you're gonna have an awesome time playing online, and it seems to you like we're giving you a good deal for whatever type of experience we're providing you. Now, are you really going to care about whether or not down the road, like 3 to 4 years in the future, whether or not you're going to be playing it? I mean, unless we're really talking about an MMO, are you really going to care?
I don't know. I'm constantly going back into my games library and playing all sorts of different old games from all different periods of my gaming. I mean,
Yeah, but I
some
think that's
days I feel like that I itch for nostalgia, and other days I want to be on the cusp of the future of gaming.
right, but you also have to take that into account for when those games were made. Now, I'm not trying to say what's right and what's wrong, but different games for different eras, and right now we're in a very, we're on the precipice of the digital space, kind of enveloping us.
Right.
And I'm bringing forth the point that, are you gonna care if you're gonna buy an awesome game because you think it's awesome, right?
Well, that's why you introduce it into the sequels. You introduce DRM into the sequels, and then they're already screwed.
Just in the way that you would play, StarCraft 3 if it came out and it was always online, and the only way you could ever play the single player game was if the enemies were going to stream in.
That'll happen. That will happen.
It will most likely happen. But like, you would bite the bullet, wouldn't you?
Well, I've been in it since StarCraft 1, so yeah, probably.
And that kind of speaks to the time that we're in, that the transition has been so gradual that we don't even really care that much anymore. Now, I do get your preservation kind of point about, how are we going to play these games ever again, And that's a very fair point. We do need to have some, catalog in which we can kind of put our games into a historical context and still have them playable, and that's a whole nother discussion. But as far as games in the here and now and how DRM is implemented in terms of how we're playing with games, are we really, that opposed if we're voting with our dollars and saying, you know what, as long as it works?
No, I got to say, when it comes to StarCraft, like you were asking earlier on, I wouldn't bite the bullet. I mean, as I said already,
Right, but StarCraft is
if-
just an
if-
example. It could be any game.
Okay, well, let's take SimCity. Okay, earlier on you were saying, you're comparing SimCity to, you were saying that it only had an online function. It didn't have a single player experience. And
Well, yeah, it did have a single player experience, but online, yeah.
you needed it to be online. But the problem I have with that kind of, it's just there's so many other ways that it could be employed. I mean, for a single player experience, I mean, take Steam for example,
Right,
right?
but we're talking about it. Well, like right now we're getting into a game design choice. Like, they've designed the game around this model.
But they've designed it around this model for an infrastructure that doesn't exist yet. Now, granted, that may well be a positive thing because it could push the broadband infrastructure industry, whatever you call it, the communications industry, forward into actually doing something to better the technology that they use to provide an internet service. Now, that's very true, but it's the fact that we have to suffer what we're suffering at the moment in the meantime. Technically, we're not really getting our money's worth.
That's right. That's where, my argument before that comes in towards, is, who does it benefit in the end, And I know that you and Roark were also getting into that towards, does it really benefit the customer of this DRM, and does it really turn future customers towards piracy if they can't have that offline experience?
Well, the problem is it doesn't benefit anybody, because the publisher goes to all this time and effort to quell piracy, but the thing is, piracy is not a huge percentage of the people that play these games. I mean, some games are more apt to be pirated than others, but like even today, pirating a game is not super simple. Like it's the regular Joe, the casual gamer, who goes and just like picks stuff off the shelf,
Call of Duty,
you
the
know,
Call
from
of
Best
Duty
Buy.
player.
They're probably not going to be able to figure out how to download a game, crack it, do all the things that you need to do to pirate a game these days. Take their system in to be modded, download the right versions of these games to make it work. So the pirating community is a lot smaller than it kind of is shown in the media and the way the publishers like to think of it as. And the problem is that DRM is to quell those people from pirating the game, because the publishers think if we stop them from being able to pirate the game at all, you know, they're going to have to buy it if they want to play it. But what they don't realize is that the people that pirate games are not interested in buying the game. They're going to pirate it. If they can't pirate SimCity, they're just not going to play SimCity. They're going to go pirate something else.
Exactly, yeah.
Or they're just going to work extra hard to crack it just so they can say, look, EA, you tried to stop us from pirating your game, and look, here we go. We've shown you that, yeah, we pirated it and we got it working anyways. So they're not, if anything, the publisher's just going to lose customers with all of the extra hoops that they make everyone jump through.
I will definitely agree with you that it does not pay to create problems for the paying consumer, but on the other hand, it's hard to come across with blanket statements saying one or the other, because it's kind of hard to do that without having any veritable data to back that up. Now I'm gonna put forward the idea that we don't know either way, right? And looking at kind of the very basic premise of this, and now I'm completely I do realize this is not a one-to-one comparison, but in the same way, you wouldn't necessarily if you go to a specialty store, right? If you go to a jewelry shop, you don't fault the jewelry shop for having a guard posted there because there's something valuable there. You don't fault a business for trying to protect their valuables or their product. You don't fault them for doing that. And in the same way, I find it hard to fault publishers for trying to protect their products. Now, whether or not that works, it's very hard to say either way, because it's very hard to get that concrete data as to what works, because piracy has been going on, and in effect it's just stealing like any other way. It's just kind of a different medium and a different way of stealing as such.
Well, hold on. I'm not like opposed to them having some sort of DRM. Like, for instance, the old way of doing CD keys. Like, I don't think the publishers
right,
should
but
just,
as Alister pointed
in
out,
quote,
it
leave
doesn't work.
it laying around. But your example with the jewelry store. A CD key or a light DRM, like we see with stuff with Steam, would be akin to posting a guard at the door so you don't steal. Whereas an always-on DRM is like having that security guard standing 2 feet from you, breathing down your neck, while you try on every ring to make sure you're not putting it in your pocket. And I mean, nobody would stand for that in a retail store. So why do we stand for that in an online store for gaming?
As said, the comparison isn't quite one-to-one either way. Yeah. But I do get like the gist of what you're saying, though. I just don't think you can kind of put it like as black and white as that, though.
I've got a little point as well. There was a point brought up or a question asked as to whether or not who the DRM actually benefits, and I think it was Kevin that said it doesn't really benefit anybody, which I have to say would probably be true, because if we take the sort of malicious side of, say, piracy out of it, because obviously there is a side to piracy which has that stereotype of, people are just wanting to play free games. What about the people who just can't afford to play the games and want to try them before they invest their money?
That's still stealing, though, either way.
That's true, but it still wouldn't stop it from happening, because let's say myself, I don't know, I don't have Battlefield 3. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when Battlefield 3 was released, obviously, I think it could be pirated or something like that, but you couldn't play it online. And naturally, I would want to play Battlefield 3 online. Now, because I couldn't get my hands on a copy of Battlefield 3 in any other way, that's not to say that it's guaranteed sale of me buying a retail version. I could just go round to my friend's house, because I have a friend who plays Battlefield 3 until he was blue in the face every single day nearly, and say, hey, can I have a shot? And he'll go, yeah, I'll just log into Origin, there you go for it. They've not really made a new customer. So I'm just, like, them preventing, obviously, pirates from playing a game doesn't guarantee sales either.
That's true, but then again, I don't think that anyone should steal anything. Like simple as that. And kind of that point that you're bringing up, and I know why you're bringing up is to say that, not everyone who's necessarily interested in the game is going to be equal to a sale, and that's kind of why I'm saying it's kind of hard. It's kind of a very weird field to be in, and to kind of make blanket statements or say something is black or white, because there's so many unknowns at play here.
Exactly, there are a lot of variables.
And that's to say, like, I can perfectly understand where these publishers are coming from, because they're losing money off of a product that they have invested hard, uh, like hard time and money into, and I have a hard time saying, oh, well, if you implement DRM, that's very bad. But when something like SimCity comes around, where it's kind of you're actively preventing your paying customers from playing the game due to some miscalculation, for a game that should be playable offline by all accounts, especially with this new news of, there's minimal server-side calculations being done, it kind of undermines the entire point of having it online. But at the same time, it's an online game, and that's kind of the crux of the whole that whole debate of whether or not that's a justifiable decision. At the end of the day, it's a business decision, and we're gonna have to respect that, because otherwise
Yeah.
we're no better than the thieves, so to speak. And we're all gamers here. We all want to support the industry in whatever capacity uh we can. So I guess what I'm coming around to here is kind of a two-way streak, and that's something that I do think, in response to what Kevin was saying, is something like you don't see very often, going back to his kind of comparison with the security guard. You don't get afforded the same kind of trust you might give a publisher, and that kind of weighs in on that publisher customer relationship.
Okay, well, let's take the security guard scenario again.
No,
Okay.
no, no,
No, no, no, no.
no.
No, I'm not gonna go all jewelry store thievery on your ass or anything like that. But what I was gonna say is, you were saying that these publishers and developers, they spend a lot of money in developing their projects to get them out to retail and obviously make some kind of income from that and try and make their money back and a little bit more, so they can invest in future versions of the game, other projects, things like that. That's how the games development industry kind of goes. That's how it goes, and they need money to do that. That's very true. But they also invest heavy amounts of money in DRM, don't they? And it's already been proven that the majority of it doesn't work, but they still use it, and it's still a vast, like a very very big annoyance to the general gamer, who obviously has bought the game and has this inconvenience of, like say Uplay's authentication system. I've never ever activated a game on Uplay first time yet. It's always taken me 3 or 4 times on multiple days to actually get it to authenticate properly, and I think 5 of the 7 games that I have on Uplay, I've had to contact UB support to get it authorized because it just doesn't happen. But that's besides the point. What I was going to say was, DRM is the security guard in the jewelry store. Now, if your security guard in your jewelry store was rubbish and your jewelry was getting stolen every day, would you not fire him and save yourself some money, or at least hire something a little bit better?
Well, what would you suggest then? Because I think that's kind of where publishers are at right now. They don't know what else to do, but they do know that
Okay.
they won't allow, these acts of thievery, these acts of stealing to be continued, and they have to kind of take a stance, even if it's just a symbolic stance.
Okay, well, what I would suggest, I can't suggest a solution to everything due to a lack of knowledge, but let's take, for example, Roark's issue with his achievements. That's an inconvenience because he lost connection briefly.
Can't get my
And
Kerrigan portrait.
yeah, hey, damn it, damn it, damn it! It's so annoying, isn't it? However, look at Xbox Live and PlayStation Network. They've got that sussed, because when you stick a new game in, there's an update that happens immediately, and what that does is it downloads the achievement or PlayStation trophy table to your console. So you can be online or offline playing the game and your trophies will still update. The only thing that doesn't happen is it doesn't get logged with your Xbox Live account until you reconnect to the network. But at least you're not losing any of your achievements. That's the way to do it, or that is a way to do it, and it's a proven method that works. It's not as if it's like unable to be copied or anything like that. I mean, I don't know how. I'm thinking about this now. I don't know if Steam does that, because obviously there are Steam achievements for some of the games, but I don't actually know if they download the table to your games folder in your common apps part of Windows. But anyway, Xbox Live and the PlayStation Network, I don't know about the Wii, but Xbox Live, the PlayStation Network, they have it sorted, and they've had it sorted for a long time, to the point where it's never really needed to be changed. Whereas you have people like Ubisoft who try different versions of what they use. I remember years ago there was that Star Force DRM, and there was 5 or 6 different iterations of that, each of them worse than the previous version because it would just eat system resources to actually operate because it was always running in the background of the game, to the point where it was banned because it was eating so much RAM and was jeopardizing the technical experience of the game rather than the game itself. There are ways that this can be done. It's been proven, and Xbox Live and PlayStation Network, I think, do it better than anybody because they have sufficient security protocols in place when it comes to logging into the network and actually checking the components of the console and, of course, the disc that you're putting into the tray upon playing.
Right, and I think on that note that we might actually have to stop here, especially because as you kind of underlined that there's a lot of ways that DRM can be done. None have been found that actually alleviate both the problem for the paying consumer and the publisher in the end. So I think we're actually going to have to stop here, and we'll be back shortly with Our Week in Gaming, so stay tuned. And welcome back once again to Our Week in Gaming. Now, this is just, as we previously explained to you, a very short segment here at the end where we talk to you about Our Week in Gaming and how the gaming landscape has been treating us and what's been going on that has affected us personally, or that's kind of our own little cause to champion. Now, I'm going to ask you, Alister, how's your week in gaming been?
My week in gaming has been pretty good. Outside of the games, I was quite excited to find. Actually, I don't think it's really new news, but it's something I haven't mentioned before much, and that's obviously the release date that's set in stone for Saints Row 4. I think August 20th is the date for that, by the way. I think it's a very, very positive step forward after the THQ stuff that happened back in January, and it's nice to see one of the new people at the helm behind that project taking a good step forward, not being tentative and just getting the game out, because it's certainly looking it's looking hilarious actually. It's looking as slapstick as ever, and I'm quite looking forward to it. As far as games go, I got myself into the Defiance beta, which if anybody doesn't know what that is, that's kind of an MMO third-person shooter game that's tied into the television show that is of the same name. I found this particularly interesting because, I'm beta testing Dust 514 as well, and that's the sort of a new kind of game because it merges a first-person shooter on a console with an MMO EVE Online on the PC, and the universes are running simultaneously. With Defiance, the television show and the game, the actions of both are meant to affect the actions of both. So a lot of stuff that happens in the TV show will dictate certain events that happen in the game, and vice versa. It's really quite an interesting project. I was playing it with Kevin and Mitch last night. The beta weekend started on the 21st. I think it finishes on the 23rd, which is the Sunday, or the 24th maybe. Whatever date the Sunday is, and I'm really enjoying it, and we had a lot of fun just running around shooting people in the face. Really, really good game.
All right, that's great to hear. And moving on to you, Kevin, how's your week in gaming been?
Well, I haven't really played much except for the Defiance beta with Alister and with Mitch. And if I had to generalize Defiance, I would say it's like a third-person Borderlands MMO, which is kind of what it feels like. it's been pretty fun so far. It's been good enough that I think I might actually, take a look at maybe getting into the full game when it comes out, because I am very interested in the concept of a TV show and video game world connected and interacting with one another. It's not without its hiccups. The UI, like the menu system, and that is terrible. It's confusing to navigate, and it's just kind of poorly designed. There's been a lot of problem with pop-in. I know when we were running around, it plays a lot like a traditional MMO with mobs of enemies, and
oh man,
the spawning and despawning of those mobs is pretty spotty. Enemies will despawn while you're attacking them, and then you might wipe out a mob of enemies, and while you're picking up the loot from where those enemies were, they'll just respawn again instantly because somebody else has walked into the area where the battle took place, and you end up with like 4 or 5 guys breathing down your neck that you didn't know were there. So it is in beta, so I take it all with a grain of salt, thinking they're gonna work on it. I mean, no MMO has had a smooth launch, so for what it was, it looks like it's coming along pretty good. After Ali left last night, Mitch and I got a chance to try one of the, they call them Arc Falls. It's their version of large group instances, and they're kind of a dynamic sort of instance, like akin to what Guild Wars 2 had, where a big event is happening, and you're encouraged to just show up at the waypoint. There's no matchmaking or anything like that. You just show up with a whole bunch of people, just all go to this one place. And the one we did was fighting a whole bunch of these bug things, and we had to kill them at a bunch of different locations, and there's like a time limit. So there was like a half an hour to finish the sort of mission, and each waypoint had 30, 40, 50 people at it, all working together trying to kill these big boss monsters. And
that's pretty cool. It actually sounds a lot like what raids are in World of Warcraft or incursions in EVE. Just like randomly generated events that players are encouraged to get together for no real reason other than to shoot people in the face.
Yeah, and these were, since it's a shooter, everything happens so much faster than it does in like an RPG.
Yeah.
So these instances pop up constantly, and they're just as if you're nearby, you're encouraged to just show up, and you get some experience and just sort of dynamically work together with the people around you to try and achieve some sort of group goal.
Well, it definitely sounds like one to watch, and along with the TV show, it definitely will be one to watch. We'll see how it all pans out. But moving on, how's your week in gaming been, Roark?
Well, if you haven't guessed already, I am a pretty big StarCraft fan, so I did end up purchasing Heart of the Swarm on the day of launch last week, and I have consequently beaten the single-player campaign. As far from my besides my complaints about the DRM itself, the actual campaign I found to be quite enjoyable. The missions were quite varied in structure, which is actually quite hard to pull off for a real-time strategy game. Like, one of the missions has you playing as like a little Zerg larva, and you have to infiltrate a Protoss ship and like slowly take it over from the inside. It's pretty cool. There's been a lot of talk lately of female protagonists on whether or not they work, and Kerrigan is pretty frickin' badass. I'll be honest. She'll just casually order the destruction of a planet here and there, and I don't know, she works. I mean, she's a commander of like this massive swarm army, and that devours worlds basically, and it absolutely works. Her character might not necessarily be the best well written, but yeah, she was pretty badass, I'll be honest. She kicked some ass in that campaign. So
how long?
Sorry?
I was just going to ask, how long did it take you to play the campaign?
I tend to play through campaigns fairly lazily, I'll be honest. I play very passively, compared to my aggressive online play. So it probably took me like 8 to 10 hours, I think.
All right.
Um,
Cool. Because I remember in the original release for StarCraft 2, it took me forever to get through the main
No,
campaign for that.
it's not a grind like those earlier games where they just sort of make the enemy base insanely big as the levels went on.
Yeah.
But no, I found it to be quite enjoyable. You go around, talk to your crewmates, much like you do Mass Effect, except there's no bloody elevators. So that's really nice. And they're quite interesting, too. They're all much more lively than Wings of Liberty. And it gives a payoff to a story that dates all the way back to the 90s. So I quite enjoyed Heart of the Swarm campaign, and I also just want to briefly mention Banner Saga Factions. I booted that up the other day, and it had like a new introduction section that. I'd spouted some exposition, played a little animated scene, and basically just reminded me of how excited I am for the single player on that to be fully developed. And so that's what I've been up to.
Well, that's great to hear, and good to hear that you've been playing some games that have been treating you well. Now, moving on from that, I'm gonna be talking a little about my own experience with gaming this week, and that includes two things. First off, I want to, express how happy and interested I am in seeing that Supergiant Games of Bastion fame has a new game. It's called Transistor, and thank God it features Logan Cunningham with his raspy, delicious vocals, to to give your ear a tongue bath. But yeah, I'm really excited about that title. Female protagonist, sci-fi futuristic setting, features Cloud Strife's sword and his motorcycle, so it looks really, really interesting, and I look forward to hearing the impressions that will come off the PAX floor where it is currently being shown. Now, going on from that into to what I've kind of been playing this week, I've actually been going a bit of a different route, more in the vein of what Roark was talking about. He was talking about the Banner Saga, which was a Kickstarted game, and in the same vein, I have actually been playing a Kickstarted game, an episodic game adventure to that point, which is called Cognition, which features a female FBI agent called Erica Reed, and it's a thriller point-and-click adventure. Now, it's been an interesting romp as I've kind of been going through the first two episodes, and I've bought those through the Indie Royale bundles. And if any of you is listening, you should really check out www.indieroyale.com. They've got some great bundles in the same vein as the Humble Bundle bundles.
Wow. You got that out first time.
But I've been playing those. They've been an interesting kind of excursion into female lead characters. I think overall my time with the game has been very interesting. I'm not a really big fan of it, and I think a lot of the script is undercooked, but I appreciate what they're trying to do, especially in starring a female lead character, because that brought me way back to the 90s, actually, where there was a show that ran for a few seasons called The Profiler, which also follows an FBI kind of agent psychotherapist who's trying to hunt down the serial killer, and this game is in sort of that vein, so it intrigued me right from the start, but suffice it to say, my payoff hasn't been quite as high. But with that being said, it's a worthwhile experiment, and I definitely think the good people at Phoenix Online Studios are doing interesting things, and I wish them all the best. And with that being said, let's see, did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Nope.
If I could just maybe mention the Steam Indie sale as well, that's going on.
I think people have noticed it.
Oh, okay.
No, go ahead.
Well, it's going on until the 29th of March. Yeah, it is March, isn't it? Yeah. And there's a huge selection of indie titles that are significantly reduced.
Up to a
so
80%
far.
discount.
Yeah, it's insane, some of the discounts. I mean, I've been I got myself a Minor 2081 for like £3.79, which is probably about what, $5 or $6, something like that.
So keep an eye
And,
out for that. Keep an eye out
yeah.
for the Steam Spring Sale, because it is going bananas, and there are some great titles in there for everyone.
Indeed.
Over 100 titles discounted. But with that being said, we've reached that part of the show where we kind of have to say goodbye to all of you, and I don't think there's anything to say except mission accomplished, and we're over and out.
Mission failed.